Hi, everybody. I'm Julianna Forlano. Welcome to Act Now, brought to you by act.tv. Today on the program, Greg Palast, investigative journalist, is joining us to talk about the GOP and their nefarious plans for disenfranchising Black voters, basically, and other voters of color. Also, he's going to be talking about the Steven Donziger case. Guess what? It's corporate totalitarianism come to the United States, thanks to Chevron. But first, we're going to be covering the National PTA's back to school virtual town hall. Stick with us. We have that and a lot more coming up. The National PTA hosted a back to class virtual town hall with First Lady and former high school English teacher, Dr. Jill Biden. Do you know she is still teaching community college by Zoom from the White House? That's pretty cool, if you ask me. Other folks in attendance at the town hall were U.S. Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, the director of the CDC, the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. You know, all the people in positions that crony capitalism and corporate lobbying over the past half century have rightfully led the American people to have diminished trust in. And now here we are with half the country feeling more comfortable trusting Dr. QAnon than Dr. Fauci. Can we please just get the profit motive out of healthcare now? Does anyone see how this just all relates back to our health system being profit driven? I think you do, because you're watchers of ActTV, and that's what we talk about. Anyway, school board meetings across the country have devolved into all manner of rageful lunacy, secondary to us having a for-profit healthcare system that you can't trust. Kind of, but you can, and now you have to. It's very confusing. Anyway, one of our producers, Matt, who lives in Florida, sent his kid to public school in Mask Bannerville, also known as Jacksonville. And within 2 weeks, one by one, his whole family got the Rona. Governor DeSantis of Florida eliminated the option for at-home virtual learning and banned mask mandates in crowded schools while the pandemic is surging in his state. Thankfully, Matt and his family lived, and Matt was able to make this short presentation of exactly WTF is going on at these school board meetings. Take a watch.
I got a message for you. We are coming for the school boards.
We do not need masks for our kids. It's child abuse.
This is not a pandemic. This is a plandemic.
Science is not fact.
Criminals! Every single one of you are criminals!
I've found masks that the kids had. The kids had a mask that looked like Britney Spears' underwear. The skid marks in it.
I want to talk about the real pandemic, child sex trafficking. By putting masks on these kids' face, you can't identify any of them. So by the 9 of you already voting on this, tells me you guys support sex trafficking.
Go home tonight and take one of these spoons and put it on your vaccination spot. Guess what? It's going to stick to you. Is this human? No. Guess what else? You take a black light flashlight and shine it on your veins, and you're now going to glow in the black light, because guess what? You're no longer human. You're 2.0s, and we are afraid of you.
These are demonic entities in all the school boards of all the United States of America, and all of us Christians will be sticking together to take them all out.
There is zero evidence that COVID-19 exists in the world. PCR tests are recalled. This is a plandemic. Fake virus, bioweapon jab. We know you're coming for the children. We will not comply. We will answer to God. Nothing can stop what is coming. You vote yes, you will all be tried for crimes against humanity.
You're about to open a pit of hell. You do not get a vaccine passport put on us. Have you been a good little Nazi? Hail Fauci! Hail Fauci! Hail Fauci! Hail Fauci! There's been a lot of talk about the Nuremberg Code. Well, I brought you a copy.
Because
what are you going to do about it?
The crowd out here? How do you think they'll like the crowd crowd in front of their house, which is where this goes next.
We know who you are. We know who you are. You can leave freely, but we will find you, and we know who you are. Be allowed in public again.
That right now we're being peaceful, and you better be happy that we're good citizens, that we're peaceful citizens. But it's not going to be peaceful much longer, because this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. It's not going to be rah-rah. It's not going to be speeches. It's not going to be gathered outside saying a Pledge of Allegiance. It's not going to be waving flags. It's going to be real. I've been in combat, and I never want to go back again. But I'm telling you what, I will to save this country. If it has to be against our own citizens, it will happen.
And there's hell coming. There's hell coming, and I'm not doing it to threaten anybody. But there's a lot of good guys out there ready to do bad things soon. Do what's right. There's a lot of bad things coming.
I plan on going in these school boards. Ian and other strong men. Men, where are you? Men, wake up, smell the coffee, let's go. Make men great again, right? Make men men again. Let's go. Men, I need you in the coming weeks, because when we walk into those school boards, we're going to have everything we need to do to go in there with those 9 school boards that voted to put these masks back on the children with no scientific. It's done giving them the research and the data. Do you understand that? Forget going into these school boards and bringing data. You go into school boards to remove them. That's what you do. They don't follow the law. They don't follow the law. You go in and you remove them. I'm going in with 20 strong men. I'm going to speak in front of the school board, and I'm going to give them an option. They can leave or they can be removed. And then after that, we're going to replace them with nine parents, and we're going to vote down the mask mandates that evening. That evening. This is how you get stuff done.
So the whole entire next week, we find out who voted yes, and you show up at their house. We need to intimidate these people. Yes, I'm saying that. You need to intimidate these people. Civil war. Civil war. That's what's going to happen. In a month, in 2 months, by December, civil war's coming, people. Get your guns. Get your guns. Get your food. Get a plan together. It's done.
You saw it here. That there's a lot to say, and there's a lot to say about that. Civil war? Okay, well, maybe the South is going to lose again. We'll see. This is just, I can't even, there's every one of those guys and women were just kind of out of their minds. I mean, if they think that the vaccine is a bioweapon, and then they think that the disease isn't a thing, but then they think the disease is a bioweapon. I don't know. Let's contrast what they said with what happened at the National PTA event. First off, according to a study done by the organizers, the vaccinated parents are far more worried about sending their kids to school than unvaccinated parents, which again, did they have to do a study to confirm this? I mean, it's pretty obvious. I don't know. Only 26% of parents at all feel comfortable for in-person schooling. Dr. Rachel Walensky, director of the CDC, says this.
But what we do know is when we implement the guidance for safe schools, for when we implement the masking, the ventilation strategies, the cohorting and the screening strategies, that we can have our kids be safe in school. And in fact, we have found that for the most part, cases are coming in from the community, and there's more disease happening outside of school than there is happening within the school. So schools tend to be safer places.
Is that still the case even with the Delta variant? Because I think a lot of parents worry that Delta is worse somehow.
We do know Delta to be more transmissible, and we have now data coming in related to the Delta variant. Of course, we don't have a lot of time in schools with the Delta variant, but what we do know, and we're hearing a lot about cases now, is that we're seeing outbreaks in places where these mitigation strategies are not occurring.
So just basically the mitigation strategies of masks and ventilation. I mean, are they out there protesting against ventilation as well? Are working? The big terror for most parents that I know, in addition to contracting a debilitating and often deadly disease, is having their kids come back from school in the middle of the year and then having to educate them from home while still doing a job. This is what the Secretary of Education said we have to do to make sure that doesn't happen.
You know, it all depends on how well we can come together to do what Dr. Biden said. Come together to make sure we're using those mitigation strategies to make sure our schools are safe, but also what Dr. Walensky said, make sure that our community spread is low.
Oh, that's not good. That is not good, especially for Florida and Texas. If that's the answer here, we are screwed. Oy. Okay. Well, there's obviously more to the story here, but Dr. Jill Biden has really put her joyful, calming finger on exactly what parents are going through. And she has promised with the administration to make it all okay so that we can all get back to working for, some giant multinational corporation that in one way or another is probably poisoning our kids.
The new school year always brings a mix of emotions all at once. We feel the anticipation of new classmates and teachers, the relief of not having to hear "I'm bored" again and again, the anxiety of juggling your family's complicated schedule. And that was before the uncertainties of COVID. Now, a simple cough can start your heart racing. And you know that at any moment, a quarantine could send your kids home and upend your life once again. Parents, this is hard, but you're doing your best. And I want you to know you're not alone. As a teacher for more than 30 years who continues to teach, and as a mom, I've seen that classrooms are so much more than places where our children learn math and reading. We've all seen it. When our kids make friends that last for years, when they learn to settle disagreements or find the confidence to try out for sports teams. Parents rely on schools too, heading to our own jobs, knowing that our kids are in an environment we trust. And that's why I'm grateful for the volunteers like you who do so much to support our students, and for organizations like the PTA that are working hand in hand with the CDC and the Department of Education to keep all of our schools safe. My husband, Joe, promised families that he would bring people back together to get kids back to class. And that's what we're doing now. This administration will always be a partner to you. We can't know what our future holds, but we know what we owe our children. We owe them a promise to do all we can to keep their schools open and as safe as possible. We owe them a commitment to follow the science. And we owe them unity so we can fight the virus, not each other. Together, we are committed to working as hard for your children as you do. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jill. She seems so lovely. I encourage everyone to watch the whole stream. It was very informative. It went into vaccines and the importance of the social aspects of school for children's mental health. It shows actually that the Biden administration is, doing something to address the pandemic, as opposed to the Trump administration, whose plan was COVID? What COVID? We're only going to care about COVID after Joe Biden creams me in a debate and I have to change the narrative from, hey, maybe we all like Joe now, to, oh, President Trump might be dying. It worked. I like the Biden administration's approach better. For more information, you can go to PTA Back to School, hashtag Back to School, number 2, regular spelled out 2, ED News, school safety, any of those hashtags. And that will lead you to be able to find the whole stream. You're watching ActTV. Coming up next, investigative reporter Greg Palast is going to talk with us first about the GOP's monkey business in voter disenfranchising in Georgia and across the states. And then we're going to talk about the Steve Donziger case, where Chevron is basically trying to try him on their own. It's a crazy thing. Stick with us. More to come. Okay. Investigative reporter Greg Palast has recently busted the GOP scheme to challenge the ballots of 364,000 voters based on the state's new law. He went there himself and confronted one top politico with photos of voters that she falsely accused of voting illegally, which, by the way, is a violation of the Anti-Klan Act, which I'm sure you're keeping top of mind, that one from 1871. And there's other federal laws that it violates as well. These are criminal offenses, and we have the video of Greg's work. Let's roll it.
We're about to meet with a GOP official who says that she has personal knowledge that 32,000 people are voting illegally in this county.
So my name is Pamela Reardon. I am currently 6th District Committee woman to the state party. I know for sure voters do not live here.
This year, Georgia's GOP-controlled legislature passed a new law saying you can challenge an unlimited number of voters. Do you know this woman? Do you recognize that woman?
Not offhand. I don't.
You never spoke to her?
No.
What about this guy and his wife on his honeymoon? Do you recognize that man?
No.
So you didn't call him, but you challenged his right to vote or have his ballot challenged.
Sir, get out of my house.
Okay, I will get out of your house.
The challenge statute didn't ever contemplate someone coming to town and challenging hundreds of thousands of voters at one time. This, in our view, was an abuse of that statute. That doesn't mean that you get to print out reams and reams of Excel spreadsheets and just, levy a charge against thousands of people that you don't even know and get them, removed off the rolls.
Imagine using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871.
It gets real when you get arrested. It gets real.
You heard of the Ku Klux Klan law of 1871?
I'm from Canada.
So you don't know the Ku Klux Klan law?
I'm from Canada.
Clearly you don't know Georgia law. He's a legal voter.
I got my right to vote in '94.
Okay,
so I don't like people voting illegally. Get out of my house now.
I shall get out of your house
before
now.
I throw you.
And you are sure that this is your legal voting address?
You are an asshole.
Georgia, divided down the middle, and this civil war ain't over. This is Greg Palast in Georgia reporting.
Greg, I love that report so much. She didn't get your humor, it seems.
No, in fact, we had to edit out. Here, this woman's dressed like Nancy Reagan in the red dress and the high heels and this swish house, this like plantation mansion that she lives in. And suddenly she starts swearing like a sailor. You'd lose your license.
That is so crazy. How did you get in there in the first place?
She's not the brightest bulb in the socket. So, we did, so we don't violate rules. We did say we were doing this interview, and it was set up by our great investigative photojournalist, Zach D. Roberts. He's the guy that got those horrific photos of the school teacher being beaten in Charlottesville, but he does great investigative work. His main assignment is to work with the right wing. Usually it's far more dangerous people. We thought one thing you didn't really get a lot of there is that this woman right next to the door, the reason I wasn't hesitating about getting out is that she had a shotgun next to the door right there. And she also had these between us on the table. She had all these handguns and she had stacks of ammo. So this is, but
you're like, okay,
hey, listen, you want me to leave? Nope. And what we also didn't show, because I thought it was too over the top, her husband ran out and grabbed me. I said, whoa, that's assault. We're leaving. That's fine.
Wow.
And
Greg, isn't it weird? Because the right wing would think, we watch that. People who are watching this show watch that and we think, oh, wow, she is nuts. Look we're proving that she's just, unfit for the office or whatever you want to say. She looks like a crazy person, but the right wing is like, good for her. She kicked that guy out,
yes. Well, that's the problem. In fact, I was at a Trump rally in Macon, Georgia in 18.
You are very brave.
Well, I was I wasn't wearing the fedora. I was wearing like camo outfits and all that. Nothing that said MAGA. I didn't want to overdo it. And I went into the crowd rather than in the news stands where you're kind of in a cage and people throw crap at you at the Trump rally. So I'm going in just try to find out what people are thinking. And just at the end of it, thank God people were leaving. Some woman pointed at me and said, "There's that nasty man." So that, in Georgia, I'm infamous among the right wing. And but we have our guys in there getting this info. So what happened is, you have to understand how serious this is.
Yeah.
300. She personally challenged 30,000 voters who obviously she never met. It's like she never talked to them. She never heard of them. I even had, one of those voters, the guy who was on his honeymoon, the photo we had, he just got married. And I got him on the phone. I said, "You want to tell this gentleman why you were challenging his vote?" And, she was like, And then she says, "I'm not really challenging his vote.
Because I can't win without getting
Right. Yeah, why? Because Republicans can't win if everyone votes. And it's not a partisan. I'm not here to shill for the Democrats. But the truth is that the GOP, if they don't stop voters from voting, they lose. And so what's happening is that we've ended up she was challenging 30,000, altogether 364,000. She had 87 Confederates working with her, and they were backed by a group out of Texas called True the Vote. And they're taking this on the road, these challenges. Yeah. And then behind
like language use that's proper.
Yeah, well,
True
the other thing.
That's not okay. Sorry.
I know. Well, exactly. That's interesting. True the Vote. And they are backed by right-wing billionaires, the Bradley family of Wisconsin. So you have to understand that I've been in, the Greg Palast investigative team has been on the ground in Georgia now. This is our 9th year, and which is like crazy because we always knew it was a swing state. Even the Democratic Party wrote off Georgia. But Martin Luther King III told me, "Greg, if they let us vote, this is a blue state." And so I was fascinated by that. Not that I wanted to elect the Democrats. I wanted people to vote and report on it. So I did that. Those reports, I was the first person to put Stacey Abrams on national TV. But it was Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Rolling Stone. Those are that's what I've been working with.
Well, your work is really largely responsible for us having 2 Democratic senators in that state.
While that's true, that was, I would call it, a collateral damage or a blessing, depending on your view.
Yeah.
My job was to expose the steal and stop the steal, which we did. And that did lead. The voters chose Ossoff and Warnock, the 2 Democratic candidates. That shocked the Democratic Party. Biden won the state by 12,000. And yes, it wouldn't have been possible without our work and exposure, plus the groups we worked with. You have to understand, we worked with Black Voters Matter Fund. We worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson. We worked with many other people that probably names that you wouldn't know, but on the ground folks. We won a federal suit against Brian Kemp, the governor.
Right.
And to open up his creepy files on how he was playing games with a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas. If you don't know that name, just think KKK. Chris Kobach of Kansas. Who is like Trump's vote thief in chief. And the 2 of them were conspiring to remove Black people from the voter rolls. And we caught them. We constantly are on, we were down there exposing. This is just the latest gimmick, but I'm worried it's not only going to take Georgia. Remember, Reverend Warnock is running for re-election for Senate because he had he was filling a temporary seat. He'll be running again. And Brian Kemp, the Republican governor who stole the election. Now, I don't say that, willy-nilly, stole the election from Stacey Abrams in 2018. Stacey Abrams actually cited my work there, showing that people were illegally removed from the voter rolls. And what went around the media is, again, our great photographer, Zach Roberts, and working with me, we're at the polls when there's a 92-year-old woman who was tossed out of the polls.
Right.
Her
I remember
granddaughter,
her
granddaughter is in tears. That was Martin Luther King's cousin trying to vote the 50th year of her voting.
Right.
She was thrown out. They said she didn't live in Georgia anymore. We went to her house where she supposedly didn't live with King's pictures on the wall. So that went national. But what didn't go national is understanding that she was one of 1/3 people removed from the voter rolls wrongly by Brian Kemp. And that's what elected him governor. So understand the tricks that they pull in Georgia. One of the reasons I'm there is that when they start in Georgia and then they take it on the road to Florida, to Texas, to Wisconsin, this is the problem.
Greg.
Yeah.
Greg, let's talk about the new laws that these cheaters are using.
Yes. Well, we have something called SB 202 in Georgia. And that's just one case where, they did every crazy things. Like I was a reporter who broke the story that they had made giving someone a slice of pizza in line. So you have to understand, they closed, part of the law was to close most of the voting stations in the state. You had Black people, the way that they set the polling stations, would drive 20 miles to vote. And then you'd wait in a 5-hour line because they reduced the number of polling stations. So Papa John's Pizza, that criminal gang, yeah. They came out with their little vests and they were handing out calzones, pocket pizzas, and bottles of water, which I noted for them was a felony crime in Georgia. You can't give food or water to people standing in line. Even remember Georgia's sun, humidity. They'll stand out there 5 hours. I told you about, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. So that's the type of games, plus this business of the private challenge, like this woman that we saw from the GOP, and stuff like you have drop boxes for your mail-in ballots. Simple. Well, they now say the drop boxes can't be used outside business hours of these state buildings. Well, that's the whole point of a drop box. You're working maybe even at the post office, and you're off at 6, and the state building closes at 5. Where do you drop off your ballot? Well, the answer is they don't want you to drop off your ballot.
Right.
And we saw this in Texas this week where they passed laws saying you can't have, Texas actually had a simple thing. But, a lot of McDonald's are open 24 hours. So are some of the polling stations. No, you can't have 24-hour polling stations. You can't have drive-up windows, even though America lives on drive-up. Yeah, really. So it's just these dumb tricks. But then the biggest single one is what you saw with this woman, purging voter rolls, stopping people from voting. But again, like I did a report for Black Voters Matter in Wisconsin, the same game is going on there. Remember, Biden won Wisconsin by just 10,000 votes because of a massive purge of students and Black people in Milwaukee. So,
Greg, you mentioned Wisconsin a moment ago as one of the places where the money for this kind of these shenanigans is coming from. Yes. Who is this? Talk about the source of this scheme and who, what they're planning.
Well, again, see, for years, almost 30 years ago, I did the first film on the Koch brothers, the richest guys you've never heard of. And so now everyone's figured out, oh yeah, the Koch brothers are the billionaires behind the right wing stuff. But now I want to give you some new names. People like the Bradley family out of Wisconsin, Paul Singer, otherwise known as the Vulture. And these are the billionaires, the new billionaire money behind the GOP vote shenanigans. I mean, they it was Paul Singer's money that pushed the defenestration, the destruction of the Voting Rights Act back in 2013. And now we have the John Lewis Act to restore that. And of course, that's the money to stop it. They just don't want people. They don't trust the American people. They don't like democracy. It's not a question of whether they don't like the candidates. They don't like democracy. They keep talking about voter fraud. And there's been a couple cases. Understand, in the past decade, there's been about 2 billion votes cast. And they found, a half dozen fraudulent voters. There are some out of 2 billion. Most people won't go to jail for 5 years to cast a vote for school board. And you're more likely, I actually calculated this, you're 5 times more likely to get struck and killed by lightning than to cast a fraudulent vote. So fraudulent votes are fraudulent.
Greg, what is the likelihood that people like the woman that you went to her house, and some of these other electeds will be held accountable. Is the ACLU involved? Is there anyone trying to actually hold these people accountable, or is it basically just once reporters like yourself, I think you might be one of the only ones, finally get the story out there, that public opinion takes its action?
Well, yeah, I've worked with you. In fact, you saw an ACLU lawyer on camera who was shocked. Again, it's usually that I uncover these things and then the ACLU NAACP picked this up. I did a report for the ACLU last year on illegal purges of the voter rolls in Georgia. And the other lawyer that you heard from was the lawyer for the NAACP of Atlanta. And he was shocked, but he said, hey, Greg, this violates the Ku Klux Klan Act. You know, it's a 100-year-old act, but you go to jail for this stuff. There's a reason why we had these things. We fought a civil war. 600,000 Americans died in it, so that, and it ended up with the 15th Amendment, where it says, you know what, you got the right to vote no matter the color of your skin. And these guys just simply can't handle it.
That's funny, because in the segment right before you came on, we were covering school board meetings and the craziness that has happened there. And basically one of the guys is like, we're bringing on a civil war. We want the civil war, you know, so that their kids don't have to wear masks, I guess.
Their kid, yeah. Oh, yeah, the mask holes. Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
It's totally crazy out there. So is there anything you would suggest that our viewers do in order to, you know, help the process of allowing people to vote?
Well, two things. One, go to gregpalast.com and pick up some of those stories and reports and what you just saw and get it out to your representatives. Let them what's going on. I have found that, you know, it's like disinfectant. When you turn on the lights, the cockroaches run to the wall. And our reports have been very effective. When I did my report for Rolling Stone, we got some members of Congress to walk it over to the Attorney General's office, and that stopped some, and we shut down another 29-state horrendous racial program of vote scrubbing called Interstate Crosscheck. We shut it down. But that required that people pick up the stories and material we get, and like what you're doing, which is fantastic. It's just getting it out. You know what? Because, you know, believe it or not, most Americans actually think stopping people from voting is not American. That's why they actually have to lie to their own people. Like Trump has to say, voter fraud, voter fraud. And of course, they buy it, whether it's true or not. So now, you know, so we're going to try the truth. How about that?
That would be great. And we do appreciate your shoe leather that you take right to the streets. I mean, so many people just don't have the gumption to go to somebody's house and really just, you know.
and I got to tell you, I had one network saying, well, that's too Greg Palast for us. And
well, that's
yes,
funny.
it is.
When I heard it, I said, oh, there's nothing that's too Greg Palast for our show. So I do appreciate you coming on here.
Well, you know, we don't have that kind of investigative reporting anymore. The Edward R. Murrows, et cetera, you know, like the Bill Moyers, they're all, you know, they're gone. Seymour Hersh, you know, was kind of was pushed out of the New York Times. And, you know, I spoke to him about it, you know, so, you know, I'm the kind of a fossil, the last of the investigative reporters. It actually goes on the ground, and it takes, by the way, it's really expensive. That's why they do that. I have a fund, the Palast Investigative Fund.
Which you can give money to.
Yeah, I won't turn it down, but it's not for profit, nonpartisan. And the point is to get that set up and to get the information, find the voters who were shafted out of their vote and get their pictures. We talked to them. We actually interviewed them, went to their houses, took months of work and a big team. We have a team of about 12.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do. I suggest everyone go follow Greg at gregpalast.com. Coming up next on our show, an interview with Greg Palast, who is done some other awesome work. We're talking about Chevron. We're talking about the case there. Stay tuned. You're watching ActTV. Over 3 decades of oil drilling in the Ecuadorian Amazon, Chevron dumped more than 18 billion gallons of toxic wastewater. I've got a nice image to show you. It's going to come up on the screen here pretty soon. Right into the rainforest, poisoning local children to death. and unleashing a wave of cancers, miscarriages, and birth defects. Currently, Chevron is trying to make an example of Steve Donziger, the human rights lawyer who won the 2011 case against Chevron in the Ecuadorian court. Donziger is a U.S. attorney and a classmate of Barack Obama at Harvard Law. He gave up literally everything to take on the indigenous Ecuadorians case in which Chevron was ordered to pay the indigenous plaintiffs $9.5 billion. So Chevron vuole fare una vendetta, which means they want to make a vendetta. Their case against Steven Donziger has some very dangerous implications when it comes to the United States' slide into corporate totalitarianism. We'll get to that. But first, some background on the whole Chevron in the rainforest story, brought to you by our guest today, investigative reporter Greg Palast. Palast has covered the oil industry worldwide for The Guardian newspaper in Britain. And for BBC TV, he's investigated Chevron's polluting the Ecuadorian rainforest ever since they started polluting it. Oh, no, that was probably before. Anyway, Greg Palast himself was targeted by Chevron because it was he who broke the story that Chevron had knowingly destroyed key evidence, which is also known as fraud. Here's the piece Greg produced for the BBC for some context and some history.
We're flying past the snow-capped volcanoes of the Andes into the Amazon rainforest for the rumble in the jungle, the biggest environmental slugfest in world history. This is the battleground, the rainforest of Ecuador, as large as England, where the Amazon's waters begin their 4,000-mile journey to the ocean. To find Chevron's opponents, you need to take a little boat ride. Deep in the rainforest are the Kofan Indians. No one knows how many thousands of years they've been here, living off what they could hunt, fish, and craft from the river and jungle.
We use this to carry yuca, banana, corn, and little animals we hunt. In the old days, we hunted with blowpipes. Now I have a shotgun.
Their main meal used to be monkey, but today's menu is chicken. In 1972, a helicopter landed and everything changed. Chief Emerhildo Criollo says the oil company obtained permission to drill from the Kofan, speaking in Spanish, which the Indians didn't understand.
They give us candy, sugar, diesel fuel, and cheese. The cheese smelled funny. We threw it into the jungle. They say we could rub oil on our skin to cure aches and pains.
Oh, so they told you that if you put oil on your skin, it would make you better?
Sí, eso dijo, sí.
Speaking in Kofan, Cecilia Kenama said she lost a daughter to the pollution. I asked her why she blamed the oil companies.
Many children have died of strange new diseases only since the drilling began.
I lost 2 sons. My 3-year-old went swimming and began to vomit blood.
The Kofan say the damage to their health was caused by Chevron Texaco. Chevron says that's nonsense. Let's go find out. Ooh. This pit is the result of an accidental puncture to a wellhead. Now, Texaco said that when it was operating these wells, you didn't have many of these accidents. But that's maybe because of this. It says personal and confidential. It says reports are to be removed from the field division offices and destroyed. Like that. If you were here with me, you could smell it. Yum. The Kofan say this is standard operating procedure. They drink this stuff. They swim in it. And they breathe it. In Texas, they call this sky dumping. That's not Chevron smoke. It's Ecuador's own state oil company, Petroecuador. Chevron's long gone. I can't show you all the leaking pits. There are over 200 on the lands of the Indians and settlers. Like this one. Most people would be thrilled to find oil on their property, but not Manuel Salinas. All he's got out of it, he says, is an empty oil drum, pustules all over his arms, and a stomach ailment slowly eating him alive.
I suffer these terrible, terrible rashes. It feels like my head is splitting apart.
And it's back over the Andes volcanoes, to the other side of the mountain, for the other side of the story.
Now it's Chevron's turn. Satanic polluter or innocent victim? Let's ask him.
Scientifically, has nobody proved that crude causes cancer. Okay?
I asked Chevron's lawyers about the rising number of cancers among Indian children.
Did they show you a medical certificate?
No.
And it's the only case of cancer in the world? How many cases of children with cancer you have in the States, in Europe, in Quito? If there is somebody with cancer there, first they have to prove that it's caused by crude or by petroleum industry. And second, they have to prove that it is our crude, which is absolutely impossible.
So the Indians are attempting to do the impossible. They've put on war paint and feathers, and heavily armed with lawyers, they are filing a new lawsuit. They are demanding no less than $12 billion from Chevron Texaco to clean up their forest. A bunch of natives in feathers in the jungle demanding $12 billion from an international oil company would be just a sad joke. But across the Andes, in Ecuador's capital, something happened which changed everything. An uprising of indigenous tribes and urban poor, when I was here 2 years ago, forced the president to flee out the back door of the presidential palace. In new elections, the left whips George Bush's allies with the campaign theme song, the 1980s Twisted Sister hit, "We're Not Gonna Take It Anymore." The newly elected president, Rafael Correa, told me Ecuador is no longer for sale, and he defended kicking out U.S. oil giant Oxy Petroleum. As soon as Correa won, he flew to Saudi Arabia to rejoin the OPEC cartel. And he told George Bush to shut down the U.S. military base in Ecuador unless Bush gave Ecuador a base in Florida. Behind Little Ecuador is Big Venezuela, and its larger-than-life leader, Hugo Chavez.
Buenos días a toda Venezuela.
Chavez has given Ecuador help worth millions of dollars and the political weapons to stand up to George Bush. But Chevron has a few friends in Washington. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice served on Chevron's corporate board for 10 years and is the only member of George Bush's cabinet who can carry 30 million gallons of crude oil. Chevron named a supertanker after her. Now, Chavez stands with Ecuador's leaders, and Ecuador's leaders are standing with those suing Chevron. Back in Quito, we caught up with the man who designed Ecuador's new alliance with Chavez, who this week becomes president of Ecuador's new National Assembly. And he's architect of the plan to return Ecuador to OPEC and take down the U.S. oil companies like Chevron. Assembly President Alberto Acosta. I asked him about Chevron's treatment of the Indians.
Chevron is responsible for the environmental and social destruction in the Amazon, and that's why they're on trial.
What if every small nation on the planet sued big oil companies, big U.S. oil companies, for damage created years ago? Wouldn't that bring the entire worldwide oil industry to a stop?
What we should ask is not whether that will create chaos in the oil industry, but whether the oil industry is creating chaos in the world.
What about his new alliance with Hugo Chavez?
We don't have an imperialist relationship with Venezuela. We're brother countries building a whole new Latin America.
The
The conflict between Indians and Chevron is becoming a battlefield in the war between Bush and Chavez. Not everyone's happy about the new oil order. One dissenter asked us to meet him at the Hotel Quito.
Si tú me miras.
Salud. 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 This drink is called the Spirit of Ecuador.
That's good.
Fabian Losa is relaxing after a long day as Ecuador's top television newscaster.
Do you think Acosta's demands on Chevron and the oil companies are demagoguery, are just
No, I think it's more dangerous. I think Acosta hates United States, hates Occidental. He loves socialists. He loves Chavez. He loves Cuba. He don't like a petroleum company. You know, Acosta is very, very left, and he is the new president of Assembly.
He raises questions about the environmentalists suing Chevron.
Environment activists people are communists in the past. Now they are over green but red down, like a sandia. What's the meaning in English, Fred?
right, like a watermelon.
Red. Yeah, watermelon.
Green on the outside, red on the inside.
As we left, the oil minister of the old regime waved goodbye, and I headed off to the jungle to meet one of these so-called watermelons. This is the COFAN's lawyer for their last filing, 27-year-old Julio Prieto. He describes the difference between his legal team and Chevron Texaco's.
Here come us, in one yellow cab, 2 lawyers and one technician. Here they come, Texaco's convoy, with 10 big white trucks, and I don't know, at least 4 of them are full of bodyguards, well-armed bodyguards, because they still thinking that we're dangerous around here.
I asked him why he's not suing Ecuador's own oil company.
Isn't it easy to blame the big rich gringos who left the country 15 years ago, and it's a mess right now?
Petroecuador has done bad. Now we are thinking about suing Petroecuador too, but that's not an excuse for Texaco to go away.
And that really burns up the lawyers for the American companies.
Yeah. So they're looking for deep pockets. Simply as that. That's all what they want.
They're just going after rich gringos.
Exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
It's the largest fraud in the history.
Is Chevron Texaco just an easy target for lawyers backed by the new oil-charged politicians of South America? Or is the new oil order a chance for long-delayed justice for long-ignored natives? And what happens to this jungle and the COFAN when Ecuador's own oil company begins new drilling?
Chevron versus rainforest Indians, or Bush versus Chavez. Whatever you call it, it's just another front in the war over that dark commodity that's left half the world in flames.
Investigative reporter Greg Palast joins us now. You've covered the oil industry worldwide for The Guardian in Britain and for the BBC, and investigated Chevron's polluting the Ecuadorian rainforest for a long time. And this is also a personal story because Chevron has been persecuting you yourself. Is that accurate?
Well, you just saw the report that I put on BBC television, which ran primetime all over the world, except the United States, of course. And so thank you for putting it on the air here. they filed a legal charge against me saying I was biased against them. And so I went through a year of hearings. They kept me off the air. And then the BBC, they have a very formal legal process. There's no First Amendment in Britain. And I was cleared of, you saw me. I gave their lawyers all the time that they wanted. In fact, they even said I'd put up the rest of their statements talking about, hey, kids get cancer. What do you want, man?
Yeah. They made themselves look bad there.
Right. But here's,
you didn't do anything.
So I came out fine, but I'm just the reporter. But then now here's where it goes bad. This is not a happy ending story, guys. So what's happened since I made that film is, yes, the Ecuadorians won their case after years of battle, and they won $9.5 billion for the victims, and they won for the Chief Criollo and the rest of the native population, the indigenous groups, and they also have to clean up the jungle, but since Chevron left the country and didn't even leave, like I said, even the desk those lawyers are at isn't owned by Chevron, or Texaco, as they say, Chevron Texaco, one company. So they haven't paid a dime. And worse, they claimed that the lawyers had committed fraud, and which is ridiculous. I've looked at the evidence. No one was ever charged, by the way, with obstruction of justice, when I proved that the company itself, and that was the president of the company, the Presidente de la Junta de Texaco, the head of the company, ordered the destruction of the files. You usually go to jail for that. But who's going to jail? Believe it or not, Steven Donziger, who is the U.S. lawyer helping the COFANs. He was directing the case from New York. The reason it was in New York is that they tried to file in U.S. courts so that Chevron couldn't avoid judgment. Chevron said send it to Ecuador, and then they said the Ecuadorian courts were corrupt, even though they had testified before. It's a terrific court system in Ecuador. Whatever, the important thing is, I just told you, Steve Donziger, the lawyer suing Chevron, not Chevron. Chevron hasn't paid a dime. Rather, they claimed that Donziger had committed fraud, had made up this stuff. Well, you can't make up that oil. They didn't pour 10W40 into the jungle and we pick it up. I investigated this thing to a fare thee well. These Chevron poisoned people. Chevron literally killed people. It's that simple. And they got away with it. And they said that Donziger was creating this elaborate fraud. And they found a right-wing judge in New York, a guy named Lewis Kaplan, a judge, to charge Donziger. And not only that, but he told Donziger to turn over to Chevron his computers and his cell phone, to Chevron, to get information about it. Well, they get the names of the insiders, everything. And remember, it's Latin America. You're going to end up with death squads killing his witnesses. He wouldn't turn over his cell phone to Chevron. To the court he would, but not to Chevron. And so they found him. So the judge found him in criminal contempt and said he had to go to prison. This is the lawyer who's a human rights lawyer, like you say, gave up everything. He is a Harvard law graduate. He's broke doing this case, literally bankrupt. And the judge, that's not good enough for the judge. So he went to the Trump administration. He went to the Trump Justice Department, the judge. Sure and they said, and believe it or not, that even the Trump Justice Department said, this is a joke. You're not going to really charge this lawyer with a crime, are you? And so even when the Justice Department under Donald Trump refused to prosecute Steve Donziger, this heroic lawyer. So believe it or not, the judge told Chevron's lawyers to act as the prosecutor in the criminal prosecution of this lawyer. This is the first time in American history, the first time ever, that a private corporation was assigned to prosecute an American citizen. And in this case, the American citizen who is their nemesis. So literally, they got to prosecute their own whistleblower. Plus, so Steve, because he's facing Steve Donziger, because he's facing jail time, asked for a jury trial. It's in the Constitution. The judge said, no jury trial. Chevron's going to prosecute you.
How is this possible?
And even, I know this is a real serious issue, and I want to know where Merrick Garland is and our current Justice Department, or is it still an Injustice Department? I have to say, and we just did the election story. I haven't seen Merrick Garland do a damn thing in either voting or protecting. This is ridiculous what's happening. He should stop this now. But and on October 1st, now Steve Donziger will be sentenced by this crazy judge. He could get 6 months in prison. It's crazy. But he's already been, are you ready for this? He's been under house arrest for 2 years. Now you have to understand, a contempt charge, you should get a fine. Maybe if a judge has peed at you, he will put you in prison for a night. This guy's been under house arrest for 2 years with an ankle bracelet because he defended the indigenous people of Ecuador.
So this is such an interesting case, and it portends negatively for, corporate totalitarianism. If corporations are allowed to prosecute people they don't like, what do you see in the future for this? How can this possibly?
This is horrendous. This never happened in American history. If we let this happen now I have to say we had senators, we've already had senators, Congress people complain to the Justice Department. 60 Nobel Prize winners have written a letter to President Biden saying, stop this now. I'm still waiting for Biden and the Justice Department to get off their fannies and stop this corporate prosecution. I don't care what you think of the case.
They're probably waiting for us to get off our fannies and push them so that they can have
right.
someone.
So go to
where do we go to be helpful?
freedonziger.com, freedonziger.com.
Donziger.
So Steve and Donziger is Donziger, Donziger. And we want to put the pressure on to stop. This is horrendous. It doesn't even, as Steve said, I'm willing to go to jail. But he says, but that's not the point. How many other human rights lawyers are going to be thrown in jail? This is, it's like we're in Kazakhstan.
It's not just human rights lawyers. They'll start with the human rights lawyers, and then they'll, if you don't want a pipeline coming through your backyard, then you know what I mean? This is.
Oh, and by the way, they also chased, Chevron and its buddies were able to get rid of the president of Ecuador. They basically, manipulated the system there, and they're trying to actually charge the former president. Mm-hmm. Rafael Correa, who is, by the way, spent most of his time as an economics professor in the U.S., very straight, honest guy. No one's ever said anything else. And so they're going after everyone. They went after me. They went after the president of Ecuador. But worse, they're putting a human rights lawyer is facing prison time. It's really, I don't know.
And this guy is classmates with Barack Obama. Is Barack Obama like helping at all?
I think he just had his birthday party with Beyonce. And so, you don't want to he's doing important things now.
Yes. Okay, so I would like to talk a little bit about the case that was won in Ecuador.
Yes.
And then, because it's very interesting. The last I've heard, it went to The Hague. But before that, the U.S. Supreme Court actually rejected an injunction against that judgment that was punishing Chevron. This is in 2012 when we had a different configuration on the U.S. Supreme Court, which basically said that Chevron would have to assume liability and pay damages. And then Chevron,
it's called the rule of law. It's called rule of law. They created damage. People died. And so you pay. Even, look, the stuff we saw in Ecuador, you have to understand, there's no question that they would have gone to jail if they did that in the U.S. No question, none. Even Chevron.
That's what I was going to say. Even Chevron. I mean, well, that's good to know that we still have some law that would help with that. But so then the District Court of The Hague on September 16th, 2020, ruled in favor of Chevron in its dispute with Ecuador. It upheld a 2018 arbitral award that was rendered by an international tribunal. Now, when I'm reading through what this says, what happened at The Hague, what really stuck out for me was how the court's ruling followed decision from courts in Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Gibraltar, and somewhere in the U.S. that rejected the fraudulent Ecuadorian judgment against Chevron and Argentina's highest court. So they have their fingers everywhere. Am I right?
So what they did was that they went to these, to fascist and dictatorial regimes and got rulings that Chevron doesn't have to pay. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't guilty of killing people or destroying the rainforest. What they said, you can't collect on them. All you could do is collect in Ecuador. And as I said, as they told me, they didn't leave a napkin in Ecuador to seize. So that's what it's all about. It's like, because the corporate world and the corporate legal world is panicked that if you kill people in the third world and then you try to collect in in California, where Chevron is based, that's dangerous. In other words, we can create any damage we want in low-income nations, in indigenous communities, and they're out of luck if they try to actually collect. You can get all the court judgments you want, but you're out of luck if you try to collect. And in fact, we're going to figure out a way to put your lawyers in prison.
This is really interesting in general, and I think it has to do kind of with the internet and the media landscape, because when all of this stuff was happening in third world countries and the media was closed door, you know, there were gatekeepers keeping information out, only covering things that were friendly to corporate media, shall we say. You couldn't really even get this information, but now that people are seeing that people are dying in Ecuador, they were being poisoned in Ecuador, they're probably still being poisoned in Ecuador. People care about that and they want to see justice. So you can't just kind of hide your dirty murders for oil in the same way that you could before.
Well, I have to say that one of the problems I ran into, well, I will say I want to credit 60 Minutes. They took my story, they basically refilmed the entire thing frame for frame, except for one thing. They left out the part where Chevron, they didn't have Chevron's lawyers like I did. But what they left out, I was very disappointed, is that they left out the documents I showed that said destroy the evidence, which is obstruction of justice. But I'll give 60 Minutes at least credit that they touched the story. But then there was
I don't agree, Greg. I think they put the story in there and they took the teeth out of it. Meaning,
they took the teeth out.
Look, we covered the story, but they did a total disservice. It's like going to
but let me tell you, now it gets worse. So then Chevron started threatening everyone. They used me as an example. Look, we went after Palast, and so no one else would cover the story. And in particular, and here's where it gets ugly. In particular, they went after the PBS had the right to our film. We offered it to PBS and they wouldn't touch it. And then I said to them, I looked at the website of the PBS NewsHour. Yeah. And right above it says PBS NewsHour, but right above it in bigger letters, it says Chevron with the Chevron logo. So Chevron was the #1 corporate sponsor of the supposed public broadcasting system, but it isn't. Literally, the NewsHour is owned by Chevron. It's really the petroleum broadcast system. Right. And so the petroleum broadcast system would not even touch the story, would not mention it. In fact, I did another story out of, again, run in Britain, not in America, about the Deepwater Horizon. And I noted that Chevron was deeply involved in you go to gregpalast.com and get the story, but Chevron knew that just before the Deepwater Horizon exploded, that there was an identical explosion at a Chevron BP Exxon combo oil rig in the Caspian Sea, and they covered this up. This is a massive crime. We would never have drilled in the Gulf if we knew that same rig, that same replica, that same rig had blown up just 17 months before in the Caspian. Now, we could not get that on US TV. It was all over the world prime time, not in the United States. And believe me, instead, PBS ran the story that while the Deepwater Horizon blew up because, BP just didn't have a good safety culture. Like they don't, it's cultural. They don't wear gloves at the opera or something. But they actually had the president of Chevron on. This is the guy who covered up, who had personal knowledge of the prior blowout, who covered it up. And PBS put on the president of Chevron, their #1 sponsor, by the way, without saying that he's paying for this show. Mm-hmm. They put him on to say, Chevron would never create environmental damage. Really? I was just in Ecuador. Look at those pictures in Ecuador.
It's the same as what's going on with GE. I mean, the meltdown of the nuclear power plant, Fukushima, it's the same power plant that we have all over the place in the world.
Yes, in fact, I was an investigator for the state of New York on investigating these nuclear power plants. And again, so you had GE, and we couldn't get anything on NBC. It was owned by GE. The great Mike Taibbi, father of Matt Taibbi, did an investigative piece with me for CBS Though that will never happen again. I'm going to tell you that right now. But again, so they've learned how to buy up the judges, the media, and unfortunately, even some green groups here and there are really just, well, it's just like BP painted all its gas stations green, and they use the phrase beyond petroleum. Well, once again,
well, you're filling up your car with petroleum. They're like,
well, yeah, you can't go beyond petroleum with your SUV. So look, it is. So we do have the media, the American mainstream media. This is why they are discredited. I had to understand to remember to do this story in Ecuador about a U.S. company. I had to go to BBC television to do the story about the Deepwater Horizon. I had to go to British television. I had to go to European television on a network called Arte. But you can't get this stuff into the U.S. media, well, except for your wonderful program. And I think that, by the way, you're not paying me to do this, but I'm going to say it. People should really understand how rare and important and amazing this program is, because it's getting you the hard, good stuff you just can't get anywhere else on the lame stream.
Thank you so much, Greg. We really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time coming on here talking about these stories. I know you have a tight schedule today, so I'll let you go. Go to gregpalast.com. Go to gregpalast.com, find out all of what Greg is working on, and you can find out how to support Steve Donziger's freedom, right?
And our freedom. Yes.
Our freedom too. Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye.
You're watching actTV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Follow actTV across platforms and tell your friends about it, and leave a comment, because that helps us. You can also even make suggestions on who you'd like to see, what activists, what journalists, what stories you'd like to see covered on our program. I do take a look. I do take a read, and pretty soon it looks like we might even have a way for you to contact us while we're on the show, and we can have a chat with you. So keep watching. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.